A man stepped out of a weathered SUV, the kind that looked like it belonged to a high school teacher or a retired mechanic. His slacks were creased from sitting too long, his coat a forgettable gray. No entourage, no designer luggage, not a hint of branding on his clothes. He moved without urgency, and yet there was a quiet assurance in his stride, as if he knew exactly where he was going, and more importantly, why. The valet barely flinched. His eyes swept over the man, dismissed him as background noise, then turned his attention elsewhere. No nod, no offer of assistance. Just a silent assumption. Whoever this was, he didn't matter. Inside, the lobby whispered wealth. Marble floors stretched out like still water, untouched by time. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, their light cold and distant. Jackson walked across it all like he'd done it 1,000 times, but not with pride. With a kind of patience, as if he'd been here before, in spirit, if not in body. He approached the front desk. Melissa, young, polished and bored, barely looked up. Her attention snapped to the black card in his hand. Her eyes flickered with disbelief, her lips curled into a smirk. "Are you sure that's yours?" she asked, her tone light but laced with disdain. Heads turned. The question had landed louder than intended. Jackson didn't blink. He met her eyes with a steady calm. No flash of anger, no awkward shuffle. Just silence and a quiet gaze that seemed to stretch past her. She held the card like it might bite, as if its sleek black design didn't belong in hands like his. But what she didn't know, what no one in that lobby knew, was that in 5 minutes, everything would shift. Not with noise or power, but with truth. In 5 minutes, the name Jackson Cole would echo. In 5 minutes, $2.8 billion in private equity would quietly withdraw from an $8 billion deal, and no one would know why. Not really. Jackson's eyes softened, not with defeat, but with something older, something earned. He had seen this before, too many times. People judging the book, not the author, not the pages. Melissa turned away, still holding the card like a weapon she didn't want to touch. Nearby, a couple whispered just loud enough. "Another wannabe." Happens all the time. Jackson heard them. He always did. But he learned long ago, not every insult deserved a reply. He let their words float past him like smoke. His eyes wandered across the pristine lobby. The surface gleamed, but something underneath felt hollow. He stood still, hands relaxed, but inside something subtle shifted. The card sat there between them like a question no one wanted to answer. There was no scene, no escalation, just the kind of moment that hangs in the air, quiet and heavy, where someone might pause if they were paying attention. Melissa wasn't. She typed slowly, performative keystrokes meant to imply effort. She avoided his eyes, but Jackson wasn't really watching her anymore. His mind had wandered back. 17 years old, he had stood in a hotel lobby not unlike this one, though half as grand and twice as hostile. He wore a borrowed shirt, too big at the shoulders, shoes that bit into his feet by mid-shift. He had held a tray of water, carefully balanced. A manager walked by, glanced at him once. "Not you," the man barked. "You don't have the face for VIP." Jackson had stepped aside, silent. That memory didn't sting because it hurt. It stung because it stuck, because it mirrored what came after. A lifetime of quiet rooms filled with loud assumptions, different faces, same judgment. Now here he was, decades later. The world had changed its clothes, but not its character. Melissa tapped away, still pretending to search for something that didn't exist. Jackson stood motionless, but something inside him moved again. An old cord plucked once more. He was no ordinary man. Jackson Cole, founder and CIO of ColTech Global. A name whispered in the halls of innovation. A company born in a garage with nothing but grit and a broken laptop, now valued at over $40 billion. They built AI not for show, but for service, used in hospitals, schools, emergency response teams. The real stuff. Quiet tech, big heart. At ColTech, there were no executive wings. Everyone from the janitor to the CTO was called by their first name. Respect wasn't earned through title. It was the baseline. Their motto, "We don't hire greatness, we grow it." And Jackson believed it, lived it. He never talked much in meetings. But when he did, he always said the same thing. We treat people right, not when it's easy, especially when it's not. And now, here he stood. No watch that cost a car, no guards, no gold, just a man watching the world show its teeth when it thought no one important was looking. Melissa kept typing, still hadn't met his eyes. Jackson pulled his phone from his coat pocket and tapped a contact. Victor answered instantly. "You landed? I'm already here," Jackson said calmly. Victor sounded surprised. "No driver? No team?" Jackson's voice was steady. "I came early. Wanted to see how they treat people when they think no one's watching." There was a pause. Not confusion, recognition. Victor knew this was a test. Not of the hotel, of the world. "Text me when you're ready," Victor said. "I'll wait 5 more minutes," Jackson replied. "That should be enough." He hung up. The card was still on the desk. Unclaimed, unbelieved. Jackson took a breath, then stepped back, not retreating, observing, because some truths reveal themselves in silence. Across the lobby, a girl, no more than 8, struggled to help an elderly woman with a heavy suitcase. 2 small hands, 1 gentle push. The woman smiled. The girl did too, before vanishing into the crowd like a whisper. Jackson saw it all. His shoulders softened. His expression warmed, not dramatically, just deeply. That moment, that small act of kindness, reminded him why he did what he did. It wasn't about empire, or equity, or ego. It was about people doing the right thing when no one's keeping score. He looked back at Melissa, still typing, still pretending. He said nothing, but in his silence, there was a truth louder than any headline. That little girl understood more about respect than most adults in this lobby. And that meant everything. He exhaled, not with frustration, with clarity. Then he looked down at his sleeve, slightly wrinkled, a faint coffee stain near the cuff. It didn't bother him, because Jackson Cole had never needed the world's approval. He just needed its honesty. The edge of his phone was chipped, a small fracture earned years ago during a stormy night in Seoul when he dropped it running between meetings. It had never been replaced, not because he couldn't, but because it still worked. Because to Jackson, form followed function, and scratches told stories of grit, of journeys, of not needing things to be perfect to still be valuable. Behind him, the rhythm of the lobby broke. A man in a navy suit stepped forward, precise tailoring, gold cufflinks flashing with every move. He snapped his fingers at the valet, loud and sharp. "Hey, front now." The valet jumped into motion, almost instinctive. The contrast was blinding. Jackson didn't turn. He didn't need to. He had witnessed this theater too many times before. The hierarchy of assumptions. The speed of service triggered not by humanity, but by how well someone played the part of wealth. It wasn't respect. It was reflex. Melissa hadn't looked up once. She circled the mouse like she was tracing time, like delay was her only weapon. Jackson adjusted his sleeve. There was no shame in his clothes, but the message in the air was loud. Worth wasn't measured here in integrity. It was stitched into logos, weighed in luggage. Seconds ticked. Nothing shifted. Jackson stood firm, a silent presence at the counter. His hands steady, his face unreadable. Melissa clicked at the keyboard with all the purpose of someone swatting flies. Then finally, a sigh, laced with false busyness, and a casual wave of her hand without even meeting his gaze. "We're busy. Please wait for the actual guest to arrive." There was a hush, then soft laughter from nearby. That mocking sort of laughter that's only funny if you believe in superiority. Jackson didn't react. Not with words, not even a glance. The tension didn't burst. It settled, heavy, present. His black card still lay on the counter, untouched like a forgotten coin. His name still unsaid. But it was there. Jackson Cole. Top row on the digital guest log. Presidential suite. Confirmed. Bold letters. Melissa never bothered to check, because she had already written her own version of who he was. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, a declaration without a signature. Then the glass doors opened. A tall man entered. European, probably. Crisp blazer, luxury luggage that whispered status with every wheel rotation. Melissa snapped to life. Posture straightened, eyes brightened. Her hands floated like she was rehearsing choreography. "Good afternoon, sir," she beamed. "Can I offer you some water while you check in?" The mini bar behind her was activated. Lemon wedges, glass cups, folded napkins. Hospitality at the flip of a switch. Jackson observed. Stillness in his bones. The same desk, the same moment. A different universe. The man barely acknowledged her. He didn't need to. His image did all the talking. Jackson remained silent, but his mind was awake. He was listening, not to voices, but to signals. Because sometimes prejudice doesn't scream. It whispers, and it does its loudest whispering when cloaked in politeness. At last, Jackson spoke, calm, measured. "Could you check the name Jackson Cole? It should be under the presidential suite." Melissa blinked for the first time. A pause. Then she nodded slightly, as if humoring a child. Her fingers floated over the keyboard, performing a dance of delay. Tap, pause, tap, squint, lean back. "Nope," she said flatly. "Nothing under that name." Jackson didn't waver. She glanced at him again, that half smile of someone enjoying the game. "Are you sure you're at the right hotel?" she asked, in a tone not quite rude. Something worse, dismissive, confident she already knew the answer. He didn't reply. She turned back to her keyboard, tapping aimlessly, making noise for the sake of appearance. But Jackson stayed. Because sometimes the most powerful truth is letting people show you who they really are. Near the valet podium, a young man named Tyler leaned back, sipping cheap coffee. He nudged a coworker and nodded toward Jackson. "Trying way too hard," he chuckled. "That coat, man. Those shoes. That's a YouTube how to look rich fail." His friend chuckled silently. Tyler, louder now, kept going. "Bet he Googled billionaire aesthetic and missed every box." The words drifted, soft enough to feign innocence, loud enough to land. Jackson heard it. Of course he did. But he didn't turn. He didn't need to. He'd met 1,000 Tylers, the kind who confuse performance with value, who mistake kindness for weakness and silence for insignificance. Jackson straightened slightly, not in defiance, but in clarity. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to see. "Maybe check the partner briefing from this morning," he said, voice low but resolute. "My name should be in it." Melissa laughed, almost kindly. "There's no briefing," she said, without checking. He tilted his head. "You sure?" "Positive," she answered without hesitation. "We'd know if someone like you was expected." "Someone like you." The sentence hovered between them like smoke. Invisible to some, choking to others. She turned back to her fake typing, the screen blinking blankly. Jackson let it sit. He didn't need to fight for belief. He already had truth on his side. A few seconds passed. Then Melissa finally looked up, smug now. "Partnership?" she echoed. "We usually work with large companies." She stretched the word large, letting it hang like perfume in the air. "But maybe you meant delivery." Her tone was honey-dipped in condescension. Jackson didn't blink. She tapped again, clearly doing nothing. "We've had all kinds lately," she added. "People think one fancy card gets them the penthouse." Behind them, the man in the navy suit reappeared, this time with a bellhop. Melissa smiled at him, warm and sincere. The transformation was instant. human even. Then back to Jackson. The cold returned. "If you're not sure where you're staying," she offered sweetly, "I'd be happy to suggest something more your style." Jackson said nothing, but her words were building a narrative, one she didn't realize she was writing in permanent ink. Jackson slowly reached for his phone. Calm, unhurried. He typed one line, "Confirm meeting status. I may cancel." Then sent it. No follow-up, no second message, just one sentence with weight behind it. He slipped the phone back into his coat pocket. His hands relaxed, shoulders still. Melissa kept typing, still pretending to be helpful, still believing she had already sized him up correctly. And across the room, the valet laughed at a meme on his phone. But the storm was already moving, quiet, certain, and about to change everything. Around the lobby, the world went on. Guests sipped cocktails, eyes locked on glowing screens. No one paused. No one noticed the weight of a single message Jackson had just sent. But that message had already started a ripple. It wasn't noise. It wasn't anger. It was decision. He had waited, observed, given every chance for integrity to emerge. But now the balance had shifted. Jackson wasn't here to plead or to prove. He was here to act. And when someone like him moves, the aftershocks don't arrive until it's too late. A quiet figure stepped into view beside the desk. A security guard, tall and professional, stopped a few paces from Jackson. His voice was low, manner polite, but the undertone wasn't lost on anyone. "Sir," he said carefully, "we've had a few incidents recently." He darted a glance toward Melissa, unspoken communication, and then back to Jackson. "I'll need to verify your identity." Jackson turned to face him, expression still. The guard's voice softened, not hostile, just procedural. "Do you have a reservation number or a photo ID?" Behind him, Melissa folded her arms. A smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth, as if her suspicion had finally been justified. Jackson didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't raise his voice or protest. He simply looked at the man, calm, director, measured. The silence stretched. The lobby's ambient music became suddenly too loud. The clinking glasses too sharp. A few conversations nearby faded into uneasy hushes, because now it wasn't just poor service. It was systematized dismissal. Not one rude gesture, but a process. Protocol, shaped by assumptions, becomes something far more insidious, something institutional. Across the room, sitting by a small lounge table, a woman in her mid-20s stirred her coffee slower than before. Emily, a tourist wearing a casual jacket and a well-traveled backpack at her feet. She had been watching, not fully understanding yet, but sensing. She lowered her drink, slipped a phone from her coat pocket. No fuss, no sudden movements, just a subtle shift of her scarf, angling her camera. She hit record. The screen caught Jackson in profile, still and silent, with the security guard standing in front of him. Melissa, arms crossed behind the desk, held her posture like a performance. Emily didn't zoom. She didn't narrate, just captured. Because sometimes the truth doesn't show up in big moments. It reveals itself in small, consistent patterns. Frame by frame, Jackson's lips moved, barely. Not quite a smile. Not satisfaction, just understanding. That quiet knowing of someone who has been here before and chose, again, to respond with grace. He pulled out his phone, thumb tapped once. "Send the car to the front entrance," he said into the receiver. His tone was even, calm, like ordering tea. Then, silence again. He placed the phone back in his coat with precision. Melissa blinked. For the first time, she hesitated. The security guard shifted slightly, uncertain now. Was he meant to hold his ground? Or had something shifted? Jackson didn't flinch. He didn't explain. He just was. Some people stormed through doors and raised their voices to command attention. Others walk in silently and bend the entire room around them without a sound. From her seat, Emily leaned toward the woman beside her. "They're humiliating him," she whispered, "and they don't even see it." The woman looked confused. Emily tilted her phone slightly. "No yelling," she continued softly. "No anger, just restraint." The woman nodded, her expression tightening. At the desk, Melissa tapped her nails against the wood, impatient. Still hadn't looked at the screen. Still hadn't confirmed the name she swore didn't exist. Emily kept filming. She didn't know yet who Jackson was, but she knew what injustice felt like, and it was sitting right in front of her, dressed in silence. Then came the sound. A low, velvet purr of an engine rolling to a stop outside. Smooth, measured, undeniably intentional. The silver Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled into the valet lane. Not flashy, not hurried. Just final. The valet froze. So did the doorman. Both locked eyes on the vehicle, their bodies suspended in indecision. A few guests stood, drawn by the subtle shift in energy. Emily's phone rose with her breath. "That's not a rideshare," she murmured. Melissa turned slightly, catching the commotion, still clueless to the gravity forming behind her. Jackson didn't look toward the door. He didn't need to. He recognized that sound, not just the engine, but what it meant. That car wasn't transportation, it was punctuation. Outside, the driver stepped out. Black suit, discreet earpiece. He made no show, just precision in every movement. The back door of the Rolls remained closed, an elegant beat of silence. Then, the moment unfolded. Victor stepped out first. Tailored charcoal coat, calm, efficient eyes scanning the lobby. Behind him, Janet appeared, tablet already in hand. Then Louise, silent and scanning. They didn't pause. No hesitation, no confusion. They walked straight through the glass doors like they were entering a boardroom, not a hotel lobby. Victor's eyes found Jackson instantly. His voice cut through the still air. "Jackson," he said, just loud enough. "Everything all right?" Every eye turned. Melissa's smile evaporated. The security guard took one cautious step back. Emily stopped recording for a second, then restarted immediately. Janet and Louise moved beside Jackson, forming a quiet flank of competence. Melissa's lips parted. Her voice cracked. You're Mr. Jackson Cole?" The words felt like ice in her throat. They fell into the silence like shattered glass. Victor turned to her, calm, composed. "Is this the welcome you give your partners?" The room fell breathless. No movement. Just realization. Swift and unforgiving. The man dismissed as a nobody had just become the most important person in the room, and it was too late to rewrite the story. Melissa's face drained of all color. She stared at Jackson like seeing a ghost. Her hands hovered over the keyboard like she'd forgotten how it worked. I didn't realize," she stammered. "No one told us." Jackson didn't answer. He didn't need to. Janet glanced at her watch. Louise folded his arms. The message didn't need words anymore. Melissa blinked rapidly, desperate to rewind what had already played out. The entire lobby had gone still. Even Tyler by the valet stand froze in place. Melissa's voice had changed, but the weight of everything she'd said before, that still lingered, and it lingered heavy. Then, the elevator chimed. Graham, the hotel manager, rushed out, red-faced, unsteady. He spotted Jackson instantly. "Mr. Cole," he blurted, breathless, This is a misunderstanding." No one answered. He continued, flustered. "We weren't informed you'd be arriving in person. If someone had just—" He looked at Melissa. She dropped her gaze. Victor didn't blink. Janet remained unmoved. Jackson said nothing. Graham tried again. "Please accept our apology. Of course, your suite is ready. I'll personally—" Jackson's silence cut through his sentence sharper than a blade. The man who had been invisible now held the floor, and those who judged him were scrambling, not for forgiveness, but for footing. This was never about convenience. It was about character, and they had shown theirs. Jackson turned his head slowly, scanning the room, and the room, now truly, saw him. He turned once more toward the front desk, the polished marble, the smooth tile floors, the gold-lined walls. Then his eyes swept over the people still watching, still unsure what they'd just witnessed. There was no anger, no performance, only stillness that commanded more than shouting ever could. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it rang out with the weight of lived truth. "You know," he said gently, "opportunity doesn't always arrive in a limo." A pause. No one breathed. It walks in quietly, no spotlight, no name tag, and most people miss it, because they're too busy looking at shoes. Not a single chuckle, just silence. And shame. Melissa didn't move. Her hands had gone still. Graham's head dropped, the message already understood. Even Tyler, the valet who had smirked earlier, had nothing clever left to offer. Jackson's gaze didn't accuse. It revealed, because this wasn't revenge. It was reflection, and the proof of everything he stood for had already spoken through their own choices. Melissa's throat closed, her lips parted, but the words came tangled. I'm sorry." It came out raw, shaky. Not from pride, but from the kind of shame that rattles your foundation. Her shoulders slouched, not dramatically, just enough to reveal how unfamiliar she was with being humbled in front of others. The apology wasn't loud. It didn't echo, but its lateness made it heavier than stone. Jackson didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't absorb the apology like a balm. He just looked at her, and then silence answered for him. Melissa swallowed, blinking rapidly, trying to hold back tears that didn't fall but hovered close. She hadn't just misjudged a man. She'd performed that judgment for the world to see. And now the silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with consequence. Jackson's voice returned, quiet again, sharp like cracked ice. "I don't need an apology," he said. "I need culture." The words fell with finality. No rage, no flair, just truth, plain and unforgiving. Melissa's mouth opened, but nothing followed. Jackson turned, not in anger, not with pride, just finished. His steps across the marble floor were louder now, each footfall a quiet indictment. Victor followed, calm. Janet gathered the files without a word. Louise moved like shadow. No dramatic exit, no final glare. Just the kind of walk that empties a room of everything it thought it knew. Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she never stopped filming. Her screen captured the back of Jackson's coat, the hush that fell around him like reverence. With a tap, she hit live. She typed a caption in seconds, fingers flying without pause. CEO cancels $2.8 billion deal after being disrespected. Within moments, viewers began pouring in. Hearts floated up. Comments exploded. "Wait, that's Jackson Cole? What hotel is this? Someone's getting fired tonight." Emily said nothing. She didn't need to. The camera stayed fixed on the slow-turning revolving doors. Doors that no longer welcomed, only watched. Then the feed cut to Melissa, still behind the desk, still pale, still processing what silence had done. Inside the lobby, everything returned to its glossy normal. But outside, the real story had already escaped. The internet had become the new room, the one where everyone had a seat, a voice, and a memory. Jackson walked forward. Victor, Janet, Louise, step for step, in sync. Their shoes echoed like distant thunder across the polished floor. No conversation, no glances back. They didn't need to announce their titles. Their presence was the title. Tyler, the valet, looked down. A silence hung over the staff, not out of confusion but understanding. Power doesn't raise its voice, It moves with quiet precision. It shifts the room without shouting, and when it walks out, it takes everything that matters with it. The revolving doors opened before they reached them, held open by someone who now understood. In that silence, every word had already been said, and everything worth keeping had already been lost. Melissa sank into the chair behind the desk. Her fingers trembled, her stare unfocused. She didn't cry, but shame doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits. Across the lobby, Graham's phone buzzed violently. He checked the screen. One line, crisis escalation, urgent. He hesitated, exhaled through his nose, then answered. "This is Graham." The voice on the line didn't wait. "We're trending globally. Contain it, now." Melissa looked up, eyes full of questions she couldn't ask. Graham didn't look at her. He was already walking toward the back office. Phone pressed to his ear. Steps fast, sharp, final. Behind him, the lobby was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when the damage is no longer reversible, only memorable. 3 hours later, Emily's TikTok had crossed 2 million views. No paid boost, no hashtags, just timing and truth. The video showed Jackson standing, Melissa's condescension, the Rolls-Royce, and one sentence burned into every viewer's memory. "I don't need an apology. I need culture." The internet responded fast. "This is why I dress low-key." People judge too fast. Legend. $2.8 billion gone because of ego. Duets rolled in. Stitch reactions broke it down. A corporate lawyer dissected the legal risks. HR experts called it a case study in failure. Employees from other hotel chains chimed in. "That front desk staff? Fired everywhere I've worked." Emily didn't respond. She just watched the numbers rise, because it was no longer just a clip. It was a mirror. By hour 4, headlines circled the globe. Tech CEO humiliated, walks away from $8 billion deal. Disrespect has a price, and it's massive. Emily's footage played on over 50 news sites. Morning shows picked it up. Twitter threads analyzed every second. Back in the manager's office, Graham stared at his backup phone. Blinking, non-stop. It rang. He answered out of habit. "Graham." The PR lead didn't breathe. "We're top post on Reddit. Corporate disasters thread. Global. Asia picked it up. Europe too." Graham dropped his forehead into one hand. In the hotel conference room, silence was thick. Melissa sat near the end, her hands clasped tightly. "I didn't know who he was," she whispered. Graham didn't blink. "It wasn't personal," she added. "That's the problem," he said, flat. "It's never personal. That's why it keeps happening." Melissa looked down. "You thought—" Graham started again. "I thought he was—" "You assumed," he snapped. "And in one look, you erased 10 years of reputation." No one defended her. Because some mistakes don't need explanation. They need consequences. At ColTech's global headquarters, the boardroom was calm. No leaks, no press, just purpose. Janet slid 2 folders toward Jackson. "One is Ellington. They revised the offer, public apology included." Jackson didn't touch it. She opened the second. "The other is Human Stays, smaller chain, strong culture, transparent leadership." Jackson looked around the room. No hesitation. "We don't partner with places that devalue people." Simple, final, no one challenged it. Janet pushed the Human Stays folder forward. The rest of the board nodded in silent agreement. He never glanced at Ellington's offer again. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and left. Because decisions like that aren't about public relations, they're about principles. In his inbox, a message stood out. Subject line, "Thank you," from Arjun Mata, Logistics, CEO, Mumbai. Jackson read, "Years ago, I was denied entry to a VIP lounge. Not because of how I acted, but because I didn't look the part. I said nothing. I left quietly. Watching you walk away for all of us made me feel seen. Thank you for reminding the world that dignity isn't negotiable." Jackson read it twice. Then again. He didn't respond right away, because the message wasn't just to him. It was to everyone who'd ever been dismissed. The next morning, ColTech released a short, elegant press statement. We are proud to announce our strategic partnership with Human Stays, because every guest deserves to be honored. No mention of what had happened, because values don't require drama, they just require direction. Headlines followed. ColTech chooses culture over luxury. New alliance reshapes hospitality. By noon, Human Stays' website crashed from traffic. ColTech's stock ticked upward, not from hype, but from trust. And trust lasts longer. Employees read the announcement and felt proud. Clients emailed support. Investors didn't blink. Because this wasn't about money, it was about meaning. Jackson never tweeted, never posted. He let the decision speak. And this time, the world listened. Emily sat in a studio now, mic clipped to her shirt. Across from her, the host leaned in. You had no idea who he was? She shook her head. Number, just another man, being ignored. The clip behind them played, Jackson still, Melissa cold. Emily's voice softened. I didn't plan to film, but his eyes, something in them said, this happens a lot. She paused. And I thought, if I don't show this, who will? The audience fell silent. It wasn't about a CEO or a hotel. It was about how quickly we decide who matters. Online, that quote trended instantly. Because truth doesn't need fame, it just needs witnesses. Jackson sat alone at a desk, typing. Subject, one thing that matters. We can't control how others see us, but we can always choose how we treat them. Pause. Kindness isn't weakness. Respect isn't earned, it's owed. That's who we are at ColTech, not when the cameras are on, but especially when no one's watching. He hit send. Screens lit up in New York, Berlin, Singapore. Some smiled, some nodded. A few leaned back and just felt proud, because it wasn't a memo. It was a mirror. Night wrapped the city in silence. Jackson stood at the window of the 49th floor. Lights below flickered, busy, beautiful, blind. He pressed his hand to the cold glass. Not to push, just to feel. No victory pose, no champagne, just a long, steady breath. Behind him, the room remained dark. Then, one light went out. The city kept shining, but his floor dimmed into stillness. No applause, no camera flash. Just truth. Because respect isn't something you earn through wealth, looks, or fame. It's how you greet a stranger. It's how you speak when no one is listening. It's how you treat the world before it tells you who's worth your time. And if you've ever been misjudged, overlooked, unseen, unheard, you already know. This isn't just Jackson's story. It's ours. And maybe now, it's time to stop staying quiet.